some stories, they just stick with you. They really do. Not just the facts, but the sheer length of time it takes to get any kind of answer. And that's exactly the situation we're looking at today, coming out of Kilgore, Texas. A really shocking crime that just echoed for decades.
Absolutely. We're doing a deep dive into the 1983 Kentucky Fried Chicken murders, a case that, well, it haunted that town for over 20 years, left behind so much grief and, honestly, a lot of questions still.
Yeah. And for this deep dive, our main source is the Wikipedia entry covering the case.
Yeah.
So our mission here is to really break down what happened for you, the listener.
Yeah.
We want to lay out the key facts, trace that long investigation, the ups and downs, and see how they eventually got convictions. But also maybe highlight those bits that still feel unfinished.
Yeah, exactly. The goal is, by the end, you'll have a really clear picture of this whole tragic situation in Kilgore.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. September 23rd, 1983.
Right. Just before closing time. Kentucky Fried Chicken, Kilgore. Everything just changed in an instant.
Yeah, the info says armed robbers came in. And it wasn't just staff there, right?
No, that's the thing. 5 people ended up being involved. 3 employees, Opie Hughes, Joey Johnson, Monty Landers, and then 2 friends of one of the employees, David Maxwell and Mary Tyler, just waiting there.
Wow, just waiting.
Yeah. And then all 5 were abducted, taken from the restaurant. You just can't imagine the fear.
No, it gets worse, obviously, the next day.
They found the bodies, all 5, out in a field off County Road 232.
And the details are just grim. Shot in the back of the head.
Yeah, and other shots to the torso as well. Just brutal.
Really speaks to just a horrifying level of violence.
It really does. It's hard to even picture that scene.
And there's another detail about one of the victims, Opie Hughes.
Yes, she was found a little distance away from the others, and the findings showed she had also been raped.
Which immediately adds another terrible layer and raises questions, Was there another motive, another person?
Exactly. It complicates things right from the start. A brutal, seemingly random act, but with this extra element of violation.
And as you said, this case, it just went cold.
Yeah, for so long. 22 years. Think about that. Over 2 decades with no answers. Imagine living in that community.
22 years. It's staggering. The information mentions arrests were made, sort of, in the early years. But nothing stuck.
Right. Leads that just fizzled out. Must have been incredibly frustrating for the investigators, for the families.
And you can see why. I mean, back then, the tools were different. Evidence collection, analysis.
Absolutely. Time passes, memories get fuzzy, people move. And forensic science itself was evolving. DNA was really just starting.
Which becomes important later, doesn't it?
Crucial. But before that, there was an arrest that looked promising for a bit.
Ah, yes. James Earl Mankins, Jr. What was the link there?
They found a torn fingernail on one of the victims, and they linked it, or thought they linked it, to Mankins.
Okay. And he had a record.
Yeah, drug offenses. And interestingly, his father was actually a state representative at the time.
Oh, wow. That must have added a whole layer of public interest. Maybe pressure, too.
You'd have to assume so, yeah. Definitely more scrutiny.
So Mankins is charged, but then science steps in.
Right. DNA analysis. By this point, it's much more sophisticated than it was back in '83. And the tests showed, well, the fingernail wasn't his.
So exonerated by DNA after proceedings had even started.
Exactly. He was released. A major setback, obviously, for the case at that point. Showed how far science had come, but also maybe how far they still had to go.
A dead end. But then years later, November 2005, things change.
Finally, yeah, a huge breakthrough after all that time. 2 men arrested, cousins, actually. Darnell Hartsfield, 44, and Romeo Pinkerton, 47.
And the really interesting part here, they were already in prison.
That's right. Both serving time for other unrelated crimes when they were charged with this.
But wait, wasn't Hartsfield's sentence somehow connected?
Yes, good point. Hartsfield, he was actually serving life for aggravated perjury. And that perjury charge was directly related to the KFC murders investigation.
Aggravated perjury. So basically lying under oath in a serious way.
Exactly. Lying to obstruct the investigation into the murders. So he was clearly on their radar for a while, actively hindering things, it seems.
Okay, so that context is important. They're both arrested, charged with capital murder.
Right, which in Texas, as you know, can mean the death penalty. A very serious charge.
So the legal wheels start turning. Pinkerton first.
Yeah, Romeo Pinkerton. Jury selection for his trial started August 2007. Took a while, actually. Finished end of September in New Boston.
And his trial, the death penalty trial, was set for October?
Mid-October, yeah.
Hmm.
But before it actually started, well, things shifted.
Even though he'd been denying it. I think the source mentioned a newspaper article where he was still saying he was innocent.
Yeah, the Houston Chronicle, April 2007, he was publicly denying everything right up until near the end there.
But then
Yeah.
he pled guilty.
He did, October 29th, 2007. But not to capital murder. He pled guilty to 5 lesser counts of murder. Part of a deal, it seems.
Okay, so a plea deal. What did that mean for his sentence?
5 life sentences, but served concurrently, meaning all at the same time. So he avoided the potential death sentence.
Right. Concurrent versus consecutive. Big difference. And he's still incarcerated now.
Yeah. Last information has him at the James V. Allred unit in Wichita Falls.
Okay, so then the focus shifts to the other cousin, Darnell Hartsfield.
Right. His trial was in 2008, but they moved it, didn't they?
Yeah, change of venue because of all the publicity, presumably. Moved it out of East Texas to Bryan, Brazos County. Pretty standard for high-profile cases like this.
Makes sense. Ensure a fair jury pool.
And the outcome of his trial.
Guilty. Convicted. And his sentence was different from Pinkerton's. He got 5 life sentences, too, but consecutive.
Consecutive, so one after the other. Essentially ensuring he'd never get out.
Pretty much, yeah. A much harsher outcome in practical terms.
And did he appeal?
He did. But the conviction was upheld. Texas 6th Court of Appeals, February 2010, so the conviction stood.
So you might think, okay, case closed, 2 convictions, justice served, maybe.
Well, that's where it gets complicated again, because even with those convictions, there's this major loose end, a really unsettling one.
The DNA, right, from Opie Hughes.
Exactly. The DNA evidence recovered from her body related to the sexual assault. It didn't match Hartsfield. It didn't match Pinkerton.
And it didn't match Mankins either, the guy initially arrested.
Correct. Didn't match any known suspect.
Wow, so that strongly points to a third person. Someone involved who was never caught.
It really does. It's hard to interpret it any other way. Someone else was likely there involved in at least that part of the crime.
And neither Hartsfield nor Pinkerton ever gave up another name.
Never. As far as we know, they took that secret, if there was one, with them, which leaves this huge question mark hanging over everything.
Hanging there? Were they protecting someone? Was someone else the ringleader? We just don't know.
And you have to think about the families. Knowing that someone else might have been involved and is still out there, that's going to be tough.
Yeah, incredibly tough. And this case, because of all these twists and the long wait, it stayed in the public eye, didn't it?
Oh, yeah. It was featured on Cold Case Files fairly recently, 2022. An episode called Friday Night Ghosts shows how these things just resonate for years.
And there was a recent update on Hartsfield, too.
Yes, Darnell Hartsfield died in prison May 2022. He was 61. Cause of death reported as a hemorrhagic stroke.
And he actually had parole coming up for consideration.
Yeah, scheduled for January 2023. But obviously that didn't happen.
So when you step back and look at it all, horrific crime, decades of waiting, a breakthrough, 2 convictions.
Yeah.
But this shadow, this DNA shadow.
It's the perfect, though tragic, example of how complex these cases are. For the listener, think about the families in Kilgore. Decades of pure uncertainty. Then finally, some answers with Hartsfield and Pinkerton being convicted. That must have brought some relief, some sense of justice.
Sure, yeah, some closure.
But then, knowing there's DNA evidence pointing to someone else, someone unidentified, that just reopens a wound, doesn't it? Leaves things fundamentally unresolved.
It really does. It highlights how even when the legal system reaches a conclusion, the full truth might still be murky. Pieces missing.
So, what stands out most when you hear all this? Is it the sheer violence, the 22-year wait? Or is it that lingering doubt about a third person?
It's a lot to process.
Yeah.
So just to recap the key points for everyone listening. We had the brutal robbery and murder of 5 people at the Kilgore KFC in '83.
Right. Then that incredibly long, frustrating investigation, the false start with Mankins.
The breakthrough arrests of Hartsfield and Pinkerton over 2 decades later.
Their trials, Pinkerton's plea deal for concurrent sentences, Hartsfield's conviction, and consecutive sentences.
And crucially, that unresolved DNA evidence from Opie Hughes pointing strongly towards an unidentified third party.
Yeah. And despite the convictions, that piece of evidence, that unknown DNA profile, it just casts this persistent shadow over the whole thing.
It really makes you think, doesn't it, about what the full story even means in cases like this. Does that lingering doubt, that unknown element, mean we don't really know what happened that night?
It certainly suggests the picture is incomplete. And it forces you to think about how communities, how families cope with that kind of uncertainty, even after convictions. Sometimes the questions just never fully go away.